Good afternoon. Welcome back for another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. Here with Dotan Saguy talking street photography. A huge thank you to our sponsor for today's event, Leica. Dotan, you're no stranger to us. Everybody is no stranger to you. We all know you, love your work. Huge friend of the B&H Event Space. So I'm going to kick it over to you again. We are taking questions. We're going to hold them until the end. If you do have them throughout, feel free to get them in, but we will be addressing questions at the end. But today we're talking 10 tips for making your street photography stand out. Dotan, take it away.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me again. For those who haven't viewed any other videos or anything, my name is Dotan Saguy. I'm a street photographer and documentary photographer based in Los Angeles, California, and it's great to be back. I'm the author of two photo books that have been published by Kehrer Verlag, German publisher, in 2018 for the Venice Beach book and in 2020 for Nowhere to Go But Everywhere. I'm also a Leica Akademie instructor and an ambassador for DxO, who's the maker of Silver FX Pro, which I know a lot of you use, and other plugins, of course. Now, street photography today, it has become very popular, as you all know, and it's become a pretty crowded space, just like this little bodybuilding contest over here. And let's face it, it's really hard to stand out these days. The good news is, I think you can make your images stand out by changing just a few aspects or refining a few aspects of your street photography practice. And the good news is you don't have to take any steroids. Like this guy. I teach many workshops, and I run actually my own online street photography masterclass since last year, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But why is that relevant? Well, I get to see firsthand when my students make mistakes, and a lot of them that are starting out make those mistakes. So I've been kind of collecting a list of my top 10 that I see people make, and I wanted to share them with you so you know how to avoid them and how to elevate your work and make it stand out by avoiding those mistakes. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right into the first one, which is, and they're not in no particular order. The first one being wrong place and time. And I'm not talking about the wrong place and time that gets you arrested or gets you in trouble. I'm referring to the fact that most people, most new students that I see don't really give much thought about where and when they go to shoot. And the reason why typically is because I think there's a romantic notion that you can make great images everywhere if you just know where to look. The other thing is, I think it's just more convenient, to go shoot in your backyard. If you have a moment, just go down the street and take your camera and feel like you're doing some street photography. And the problem is it makes for, oops, just jumped too fast. The problem is that it makes for dull images a lot of time. Street photography is all about people and capturing interesting moments. And it's not really realistic to just go out the street, in the street behind your house or your apartment and at any time that you're free and expect capturing, great moments, especially if there's not much happening around you. I think it's just too much pressure to put on yourself. And oftentimes, there's just, nothing to actually photograph. So there's a great quote by Jim Richardson, who's one of my favorite Nat Geo photographers, who said, if you want to be a better photographer, stand in front of more interesting stuff. And I think he has a point there. And so the takeaway for me on this particular point of the wrong place and time is that you have to be really strategic about where and when you go shoot, even if that means, getting to the car and driving for half an hour, or going into the subway, or taking an Uber or something. But researching a little bit of where the action is and when to go really gets you a long way. I would also add something about shooting on your own, if your goal is to really make your best work, I've noticed that a lot of, especially beginning photographers, they just like the encouragement and the whole socialization of going as part of a group and going shooting with people. And what I see is, I know personally, I never do my best work if I go shoot with people. I usually have a great time. It's great for socializing, but in terms of actually producing great work that stands out, not the right approach. So that's the other thing I would think about, when planning to go shoot. The second thing is a recurring theme. I know we've talked about it a few times, but it's the fear of getting close to people you don't know. And often beginning students will show me images where it's either taken from too far, like this, or showing people's backs, or without any people at all. It's just buildings, and it's just a random street. And when I ask why, and I try to get to the bottom of like what made them take this photo, usually it's because they're afraid that someone will notice them and get mad at them. Or I'd say the better excuse is I was trying to stay invisible to avoid disturbing the scene, that sort of thing. And that's a decent point, because staying invisible does work sometimes, mostly when your subject is distracted. Like here, this is an example where these people were just roller skating, and by sunset there was loud music blasting, and nobody was paying attention to me, and other people were taking photos anyway. So those are fine, but you still need to get close. You still need to compose well, and you still need to wait for peak moments. So it's not an excuse, that. But I think it works sometimes. The point is, though, that most times it's nearly impossible to capture a strong moment if you're going to try to stay invisible. And the reason is that you just can't stay long enough without getting noticed in most of those situations. And you kind of have to stay if you're going to capture a strong moment. Strong moments don't happen all the time, and they typically happen very sporadically. They can repeat themselves, but they don't happen like right at the point where you notice something. So what I tend to do is that I just sometimes, when I know I need to stick around to capture those moments, I will go ahead and engage with the people in question. Usually, so it could be just a nod to just get a sense of like whether they're okay for me being there. But what I actually prefer to do is to start by giving them a heartfelt compliment. Why was I attracted by the scene in the first place? What was my motivation there? What caught my eye? And I explain what I do, what is the context, like I'm out, maybe working on a project, or, this is part of a collection of street photography that I do in this area. And which explains to them my motivation for doing this. There's nothing shady about it. It just clears that right out. And then I'll ask if it's okay for me to stay and shoot some candids. And then on top of that, I'll offer to share the images afterwards. So that there's a bonus for them. If they let me do that, they're going to get some pictures, so that there's something in it for them. And then if needed, I'll tell them to ignore me and to go right back to what they were doing and do as if I wasn't there. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time for them to actually, be less self-conscious, but it does work well. And very few people turn me down. People don't like confrontation, so that's a real positive. That's on your side. They like the attention usually, and they love getting the photos. That's a big thing, to be able to for me to share the photos with them at the end. There's definitely a carrot there. So. But what that means is once they give their okay, I have their consent to stick with the scene for as long as I want, pretty much. And I can try different angles, different ideas. They usually end up ignoring me after a while anyway. So I get to still get the candid shot, which I would have gotten staying invisible, but now I can get it over and over and over. And the takeaway is basically, if you learn to engage with people, it creates a lot more opportunities, and that will make your work stand out than if you just try to stay invisible. So that's my second point. The third point, which is related, is that most people capture what I mean when I see a lot of the students and work that I see online. There's a lot of weak moments. What not to be too judgy, but a lot of the moments I see are very, are not that interesting. And again, I think it's because people are trying to stay invisible and they don't want to get too close and they don't want to engage with subjects. And the problem is, once again, strong moments don't happen all the time. They require patience and anticipation. And so by approaching people, you really get to stay as long as you want. Now, you obviously don't want to pick scenes that have, you want to pick the scenes that have the most potential. Like, I wouldn't have picked this one, for example, hoping that something great was going to happen. You want to, be more selective about what, what would make for potential great moments to come. But as you shoot, once you pick the right one, you never know when the strongest moment is. So the point here is that you really want to work the scene for as long as you can, or as long as it's there, basically. As long as the scene is still unfolding, as long as you have consent first from the person and the scene is still unfolding, there's no reason for you to just say, okay, I got it, bye. No, you just stay with the scene. And I've stayed with scenes that have lasted, 3 minutes, 10 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. I mean, I've had those opportunities to stay with very long scenes where they just kept giving, and I just kept making great images. And I can choose later which one I prefer, because I can't publish every single thing I shot in that scene. But you never know when the best shot is going to come along, and you want to stay with it for as long as it's unfolding. I think there's a tendency, I see that very often with my students. I think it's something maybe politeness, or they don't want to impose. So as soon as they feel like, okay, I got it, then they move on to the next thing. The problem is you're not guaranteed to find anything better that day than a great scene that you're already shooting. So this is a great example of kind of a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. You really want to keep shooting it as long as it's unfolding. And of course, if the people say, okay, bye, kind of politely making you understand that you're imposing, then of course you go away. But that almost never happens. I usually stay, until the scene is over. The next one is a boring point of view. And I mean, this particular image has more wrong about it than the boring point of view, but that's one of the issues. And most people, when I see, especially again, beginning students, they shoot at eye level. The reason is quite, logical. That's because that's where they hold the camera. You just hold the camera to your eye, and that's where you shoot. So the problem is that it leads to images that look like what everybody else can already see. Like the people who are looking at your image, this is how they see every day. There's nothing special about that specific point of view. And I think in terms of elevating your images and making them, look special, is you need to show people something they don't normally see. You need to surprise them. You need to hit them. There's so much out there. You need to hit them with something that will, really impact them. And for that, one of the tricks in the bag is to vary your point of view. So, I often resort to shooting at ground level. I think if I was a very tall guy, I might do more, from up above, but I'm 5'9", so that doesn't work for me very well. But shooting from ground level is great. It gives you a completely different perspective that people don't usually see. The problem with that is you have to be comfortable not necessarily having the camera in front of your eye, because, especially in moving scenes like this, I was walking back. There's no way I can crouch down to the point where the camera is low enough, and like I would trip all over myself trying to have the camera in front of my eye. So you have to learn how to be comfortable not having the camera in front of your eye. And I know what some of you guys are thinking. That's why I need a flip screen. So I'm going to upgrade to that camera with a flip screen. And I completely disagree. I mean, if you like using a flip screen, go right ahead. And if you're good at it, by all means. It doesn't work for me, and I'll tell you why. For example, so if very pointed example here, a flip screen would not have helped me in this particular instance. I don't know if you can see in the back of this photo, there's a metal fence. Well, that same metal fence was in front of me in this particular scene, like especially shooting from a low angle, which I needed to do in order to juxtapose these two things. There's just no way to put the camera in a place where I wouldn't have the fence in front of me. So in this case, I had to put the camera over the fence and try to aim it so that I would get this shot. So I was basically shooting blind. And this is the way I operate for all these shots that are taken from, low angles or directly from ground level. I taught myself to shoot blind for that reason, because things are moving fast. There's bright sun often where I shoot, and it's just too quick and it would be too finicky to use a flip screen for those kinds of images. So, shooting blind is actually not that hard. It just requires a lot of practice, and it requires one other thing, which I know some people don't really want to make the sacrifice, or they view it as a sacrifice, is to shoot with a single focal length. And because you need to get used to what that focal length sees, so you can see it with your own eyes without looking through the viewfinder, if that makes sense. So that's the main reason why I only shoot with a 35 millimeter, which is just for 35 prime. So I don't have a zoom. I just use a 35 because I use it all the time, and I get used to exactly what the camera sees. So much so that I often don't have to put the camera to my eye to take a photo. And I pretty much get what I intended to get. Of course, if I need to very critically frame something, then I'll, double check, with the back LCD or whatever. But most times I will just take the photo and I'll get pretty much what I thought I would get. Again, it requires two things. One, sticking with one focal length. It could be a 28, it could be a 35. You really can't really be anything longer than a 35 because it gets very hard to guesstimate once it gets longer than that. And it requires a lot of practice. So those are the things. But it really enables you to to get past that point of view thing and having the camera in front of your eye. Again, this is another example where I'm walking back with the camera all the way to the ground. Again, I don't think a screen would have helped me much there. It's just everything was moving so fast. Those dogs were moving towards me. It's something where you just have to kind of learn how to do it. And one point I want to make here, because I know people get confused when I talk about this shooting blind, I'm not talking about shooting from the hip to avoid getting noticed, which that's a lot of that school of thought of you have to stay invisible, so you have to shoot from the hip. I'm not talking about that. Again, I recommend more engaging with people. I think it's more productive and working the scene for as long as you can. So my point about shooting blind is not to stay invisible, but is to make images that have an interesting point of view and that stand out because of that point of view. This is not a point of view that somebody would see every day. So this is something that stops them in their tracks when they look at the photo. Which brings me to the next mistake people make, which is the gear choices. And I think gear at the end of the day really doesn't have too much impact on your photography. I think you can be happy with many different kinds of cameras. But the way I see most people choose their gears is very much based on specs and reviews and things like highest resolution and sensor, and is it full frame and high ISO and things like that. Why? Because I think that's just how we shop for everything today. I mean, there's so many reviews online. There's so many unboxing and review videos on YouTube. I mean, it's very, I fall into it like everybody else. I watch these and it's tempting to choose that way. But when you're shopping for a street camera, I think shopping that way omits the two most important criteria. One is, how well suited is this camera to your style of street photography or the way you like to shoot on the street? And then the most important one is, how fun is it for you to use this camera? And none of the videos and reviews and everything can tell you that. So that's where it gets really a little more complicated to choose the right gear. Now, I don't blame the photographers there. I think it's hard to know what you need when you're starting out, first of all. Manufacturers tend to make bloated cameras features wise because they want to cater to everyone. They want the beginners to buy them, they want the experienced people to buy them, they want street photographers to buy them, they want portrait photographers to buy them. I mean, the more people buy their cameras at the end of the day, the more successful they are. So they tend to really put a lot of features in those cameras. The second thing is, as a consumer, often what I see students do is they don't want to buy a camera for street photography and then another camera for portraits and another camera for vacation travel. They want one camera that can do all of that. So the result is that you get a lot of generalist cameras that are over-engineered and have huge menus that can be used for street photography, but are not necessarily built for that. And just to conclude on that topic, I think most people make the rational choice of a kind of highly rated, versatile, feature-rich camera over one that would be more fun to use for street photography. And the reason I think fun to use is a super important criteria is because fun to use is what gets you out more often. And at the end of the day, getting out more often shooting street photography is what makes you better and makes your images stand out. So that's, it's a criteria that I would recommend, next time. I'm not saying everybody should go out and buy a camera right now, although B&H will be very happy if they did. But next time you choose your gear, I would say maybe pay a little less attention to the reviews and a little more to how, go try the camera out or rent one and see how fun that feels, as opposed to the number of features that it has. The next point is that I noticed that a lot of people, especially starting out, shoot in a very literal way. I think they're just trying to get the focus right, and they're trying to get their settings right and snap the shutter. So I'll give you an example. If you see this funny statue in the middle of the street, they would kind of point the camera at it, focus, and snap. I mean, maybe they'll adjust their settings a little bit like I did here, just a little shallower depth of field, and maybe they'll take their point of view down like I did here, but most of the time they don't. And a way to stand out and go past that is to put more thought into designing the image and also waiting for a decent moment. So in this case, I was like, well, there's probably a dog that's going to react to this thing. And I waited, and I kind of positioned myself, and I pre-composed, and I waited for that juxtaposition and that interaction. The final image that I made is actually in my Venice book, and it's actually been in a commercial. It's been sold as prints and so on, and it's much more successful than if I had just snapped from eye level, seeing this statue in the middle of the street. So it's a case where, going from a lazy shot to an image that actually stands out wasn't even that hard, and I think I maybe waited 10 minutes to get this shot, which can seem long. I was like sitting on the pavement for those 10 minutes, but the result was well worth it. And and technically it wasn't even that hard to execute. So I think sometimes you want to, when you see something interesting, you kind of want to think of like what would make it kind of take it to the next level. And I think that's a step that a lot of, especially beginners, don't necessarily make, that they're happy to find something, snap it, and move on. It's again one case where you want to work it a little bit more. Okay, the next point is it's what I call obscure. It's a very, very common mistake, and it results in an image that is obscure to the viewer in one of two ways. It's unclear to the viewer in one of two ways. So either it can be obscure because you really can't tell what the image is about. And this is the case with this image, where I saw this image online. I was like, what was the photographer thinking? Usually, as a viewer, you wouldn't even go into that. You would just go, next. But I was interested from a teaching standpoint, like what can I take away from this? Because I think a lot of people make that mistake of having images where the viewer is like, what is going on in here? And here, what was happening, I ended up, figuring out that it was this strip joint or whatever that was on the street, and the school bus involving kids and everything and innocence and so on. And that the photographer was like, oh, this is brilliant. This juxtaposition is brilliant. The problem is it doesn't come through clearly enough. Like there's not enough hints in the information that's in this image at first glance anyway, for somebody to get it. And that's where this photograph falls short. The other way that a photograph can be obscure is because it's just too hard to read. And it just becomes uninteresting to the viewer because it's just too much, and it's not organized enough for the viewer to make anything out of it. So here, I think the photographer might have seen like a brilliant layered scene that was vibrant and super dynamic, but everybody else who looks at it sees a busy scene with poor separation between the subjects and not really like a specific thing to look at. So in either case, what those two photos have in common, and they're very different photos, admittedly, but what they have in common is that they make the viewer work way too hard to get it. And I'm not going to lie to you, this is going to be one of the toughest one to remedy. To fix this, to make a photo not obscure is really hard, because you have to work on all these things that, I think that are hard in street photography. You have to create a visual hierarchy to show the viewer where to start and where to go next and so on. You have to separate your subjects, which can be a nightmare timing wise and so on, to get everything synchronized so everything is separated, especially when things are in movement. You have to clean up your backgrounds. You have to make sure your background is not going to be distracting. If it is distracting, you have to find ways to fix it. You have to make sure that there's faces showing, because faces are expressive and that's what people can get as information to read your picture better. So there's a lot of things to think about and a lot of things to do. It's probably the most difficult thing to master in all of the steps that I'm talking about here. But I think even if for people who aren't, just at the level where they can deal with all these things all at once yet, I think being aware of the potential pitfall of this obscure image, I think, can already help you on your way to make your images stand out. At least when you edit, maybe you don't think about it when you take the photo, but when you look at your photos, you'll be more conscious, I think, about what, will the viewer get it? Is this clarified enough? Is it also separate? Does it have all these things that the viewer needs in order to make something out of this photo? Another very common thing that I see, especially again with beginners, and this happens when I do in-person workshops with I'm starting to do again. We'll talk more about that. On the first day, I think it's the pressure. People come to those workshops and they're one of 10 students or so, and they want to kind of prove themselves, and they want to make sure they're productive, and they've paid a lot for the workshop, so they want to make sure they take advantage of it. And a lot of times I'll have one or two people who come back with like 2,000 frames on their SD card, and we go through all of them, and there's not one that can be a select, or that maybe there's one, but it's like out of 2,000. And they're basically pressing the shutter way too much. It's just, they're just not leaving it alone. And I think the reason why that happens is that today, photos are essentially free. I mean, memory space is free and you're not paying for development. And it's just like, why not press the shutter? It might be something. And I think that's not what's on people's mind. The other thing is, I find that people have the sense of being productive and they're enjoying using the gear, and they feel like by pressing the shutter, it's like that's what kind of makes them a photographer. And so the more they press the shutter, the more of a photographer they feel like, and the more productive they feel. And I think just cameras are super fast these days. So you can shoot 15 frames in a single second if you keep the shutter pressed. And I think a lot of people, take advantage of that. And so it means that at the end of the day, they have those 2,000 frames to edit through. And by editing, I always need to, I'm using the editing in the photojournalistic sense. So it's picking the images, not actually processing them. But so when they have to actually edit 2,000 pictures, it's a lot of work, and it's brutal because, like, you know, it's big disappointment. You're looking through 2,000 images and there isn't one that actually stands out. So if it's free, what's wrong, you know, with shooting 2,000 images? Again, it's hard. Well, I think it's all the stuff we just talked about. Plus, I think it's really hard to concentrate, frankly, if you're constantly being distracted by sort of mediocre opportunities that you're just kind of snapping right and left. When a great opportunity comes, you may not notice it, or you may not pay as much attention to it as you would. And, you know, by then your battery might also be low because you've taken so many pictures. And I think for your attention, you know, forget the battery, just your personal battery won't last as long. So, and again, it's very discouraging when you get to the edit. So I would say, to stand out, in this case, I would recommend really vetting each opportunity before you commit to it. I think there's you know, we talked earlier about how, you know, once you commit to a scene, you really want to stay till the end. Well, you have to make it worth it. Like, you can't commit to every single scene that way. So that's when you have to really be more selective and decide. And some days, you know, I won't lie, I will go out and there is not one scene I feel like committing to, and that's okay. I come back, you know, maybe I'll snap one shot just to mark, you know, in my Lightroom that I was out that day. I'll just take a photo of the pavement or whatever, just to have like a record that I was out. But I'm not going to do anything because I didn't find anything interesting enough to commit to it, and that's okay. I had a good time, and I can't expect to find great scenes every single time I go out. And then other times I'll have, you know, 5 different scenes that I bump into, and, you know, I'll shoot much more. But even then, I don't think I ever shoot more than, I don't know, 700 pictures in one day. Even if, you know, if I find multiple scenes that are interesting. So anyway, I think it's, you know, something about thinking about committing and then really, you know, figuring out, you know, working each scene. We're getting to the 9th one. So this is about processing. So this is a raw file from an image that's also published in my book, and I'll show you the difference. But this is before it's processed. This is just the raw file unprocessed. A lot of photographers I see don't process their images at all. And some will process them way too much. And it's hard, again, also for beginning street photographers, to know kind of how much to process and whether to process and all that. What I notice is that the people who don't process at all often are just a little bit technology adverse, and they don't know how to use the software properly, so they just don't do it, and they just, you know, maybe use just convert to JPEG and just use the JPEG, or just hit the auto button in Lightroom or something. The second kind of people who process too much, these are people who really, really enjoy using the software, and they enjoy using the software even more than they enjoy shooting, and they feel like often software maybe could compensate for weak images by, you know, adding some vignetting and converting to black and white, and, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, even a mediocre image could be great. And that doesn't work. Like that never happens. I mean, processing helps, but it won't save a bad image. So you know, the problem is unprocessed image can be dull, like, you know, there's just not that much contrast to it. Overprocessed just look amateurish. When you post them, people who know what processing is supposed to be like, they can see immediately through what you did in terms of, you know, processing too much. So in the film days, of course, you know, people had an excuse. You know, you need a dark room and chemicals and a lot of skill to actually, you know, pull off, you know, a good development. Today, you don't need all this stuff, and you just need to have a software that you use and that you know how to use, and then you need to know what to achieve also. It's not just making images to make them prettier, process images to make them prettier. You have to know what you're trying to do with the image in terms of maybe clarifying it, you know, really advancing the vision that you had for the image through the processing. So for me, I swear by Nick Silver Effects Pro, and I told you I'm an ambassador for them, so I'm biased, but it's a software I had been using for years before I became an ambassador for them. And it's fantastic. No, doesn't mean it's the right tool for you, but what I would recommend is finding the right image processing tool that you and learn how to use it, and something that works for you, and then process with intention. So not necessarily to make the picture pretty, but to put the spotlight on what you want in the picture, to tell the story better. So you're using processing as a way to make the image pop, in terms of the storytelling, so that's a whole skill in and of itself. And I actually, this is one of the things I teach in my masterclass, and also in my workshops. The last one I want to talk about, and then we can go to questions, is oversharing. And it's just, if you're, the reason I put this image up is actually not one of mine. This is something I found online. But if you're a singer or a dancer or any kind of performance artist, you get on stage and you do your best, while the crowd of people is watching. And if you fall on your face, there's no, you can't do it again. Like, that's it. Everyone sees it. Photography, you have a major advantage. You only get to show, you get to show your best work. If you don't want to show something, you just don't show it. You decide what you want people to see, which is that's a major advantage. I would be scared to death on that stage. So if you shot for a month and you got nothing good, unless you share your images, no one will ever know. It's like a superpower, right? So, but few people take advantage of it. And that's kind of what surprises me in a way, but also I'm not surprised, because I think most people don't take advantage of the superpower because, one, it's super easy to share pictures these days, with all these things that and two, I think we get addicted to the dopamine boost that we get from the likes and the comments and people reacting. And even if it's not that great, just like the fact that we put it out there and we have a conversation, it's satisfying. And that's all fine and good. The problem is, if you, again, try to stand out with your photography, since this is, what this talk is all about, people judge you not by your best images, they judge you by your weakest images. And I know this is a lot to, I was kind of shocked at first when I started, realizing that. I was like, oh my God, maybe I shouldn't have posted this and that. And this, back when I was starting out. But that's true. It's you post something weak and you lose credibility. And so I would say, to make your work stand out, if that's your objective, you have to learn to become your greatest critic in terms of what's a good image versus what's an image that you enjoyed shooting and you have some emotional attachment to. And I teach that. I teach how to get there. And also to wait, often it helps to wait before sharing new work. I think the emotional attachment that you have to a shoot goes away with time. And then eventually, a week, a month later, you look at the image and you're like, I don't know why I liked this so much back when I shot it. If somebody had shot it, I would not be that excited about this image. And it helps to have that distance and then limit how much you share. I think, I try to share one image per week of mine. If I have anything good to share, if I don't have anything good that week that I'm really proud of, I just won't share anything. So anyway, that was my last point there. So there you have it. I mean, these are, I hope the ideas that I shared here gave you food for thought, even if, you already knew some of them, or some of them may not be applicable to you. But I think, these can all help you stand out as a street photographer. So just to recap, I would say, be strategic about when and where to go shoot. Engage with people rather than always staying invisible. I think staying visible is great, but engaging with people just multiplies your chances of getting great work done. Work your scenes. If you find a good one, just stick with it. Don't get the shot and go. Just stick with the scene. Vary your point of view and learn how to disassociate your eye from the viewfinder. You know, be comfortable having the camera away from the eye. Choose gear that's fun for you. You know, not necessarily just well reviewed, but something that's fun for you to use. Avoid being too literal with your shots. You know, clarify your images. Think more and snap less, I would say, in terms of the shutteritis, you know, episode. And process the pictures in the right way, in a way that really promotes the storytelling, and only share the very best of what you shoot. Again, if you want to, you know, stand out that way. And so that's what I had. I know it's a lot to take at once, though. So if you're learning on your own, I would recommend you try these one at a time. You know, because if you try to do all of these, you're going to be paralyzed. You're not going to shoot anymore. You're going to be, oh, but I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, and then you're just going to be frozen. So I wouldn't recommend trying all of these at once. I also want to invite you to come and learn with me if you're so inclined. So there's a couple of opportunities that are currently going on. One is I have an online class that I started when the pandemic started. I went online, and it's a great video class that also has some in-person weekly office hours component. So it's not just like a video that you're watching. There's also more interactive stuff, and there are assignments and everything. And I want to share a 20% off coupon for that, which is BH20. And that's the URL to go there, is courses.dotansaguy.com. The other thing is, as I was alluding to earlier, we're restarting in-person workshops with Leica, and the first one is scheduled for September 9th through 12th, if I'm not mistaken. But you can check it through this link, and the tinyurl.com/Venice Beach 2021. And there's only 10 spots in that class, because we want to be really like in person and you know, just give a lot of attention to each student. And this will be in Venice Beach in September, and it's almost sold out. That's the important point, is out of the 10 spots, I think there's only 2 or 3 left. So if you are thinking about doing that, I would not procrastinate. This is one that will sell out very, very soon. So that's what I had. I'd love to take some questions at this point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dotan. I want to give a huge thank you to all of our viewers who have tuned in from everywhere, from Mexico to Brazil to United Kingdom to Germany and Greece. All over they're watching you from. So I want to start, Dotan, with
Awesome.
that last point with oversharing. And question for you is, being somebody who does put out books, is that something that plays into what you share? Is there images that you intentionally will hold on to, knowing that it's going to be in a book and you don't want all of your stuff out there? For somebody who's going to buy your book, you want to have new material in there?
That's a great point. I mean, usually there will be pictures in a book that I haven't shared. Almost, I mean, always, maybe usually I share about half or 2/3 or something. But I don't really think about it too much, though, because I figure people who want the book, it's not just about having seen the pictures. It's about, you know, what kind of sequencing and storytelling I do with my sequence, and how pictures are matched together, maybe on opposite pages, the whole design of the book. These books, the ones I put out with Cara Verlag, the craftsmanship that goes into them is incredible. I'm always floored by how they take my work and they elevate it to, you know, to such an extent. So I don't mind. You know, the long story short is, no, I don't think too much about sharing what, you know, might be in the book, and I want to keep the surprise. I share what I feel like sharing, and then whatever ends up in the book ends up in the book. But it's not a major concern.
Okay. I was always curious about that, because I've heard some people say, well, if it's going to be published, a lot of book publishers don't want work that's already out there. They want exclusive stuff. So I was interested to see what your take on that was.
Yeah, I mean, my publishers never expressed any, issues with that, and I think it's good to have some of the best images out there early, so people take interest in the project and eventually, will buy the book. And I think again, the book is really is this physical object. Which once you see it with the way it's printed, the quality of the printing, the resolution, it's just completely different experience. You might have seen the image online, but once you see it in the book, it's just a whole nother, it's like you take the experience to a whole nother level. So if anything, I think it's a good tease to have a bunch of images online before you have the book out.
Definitely. I mean, and especially now how a lot of people aren't even looking at your website on a computer. They're looking at Instagram on a phone,
Right.
degraded images, and it's small. So I totally agree with that. And for those who have not checked out Dotan's books, I encourage you to. I dropped his website here for those viewing on Zoom. We'll make sure we get that into the comments section on the simulcast. DotanSaguy.com. You can check out some more of his work and also the books that are available. Dotan, we had a question come in from Hayden Green, who's joining us here on Zoom, asking, what is your favorite time of day to shoot street images?
I go so back to the very first point of the presentation, particularly finding the right time and place. So I right now my project is in Venice Beach, so the place is predetermined. I don't have to think about it too much. The time usually I try to go when it's busiest because that's when there's and there's some exceptions. Sometimes I'll try to go when it's maybe slightly less busy because other kinds of moments might happen. And but if I really want to be productive and I want to try to get as many great moments as I can, I will go when it's busiest. And one trick I found, and this might apply, or not to where people are shooting right now. Venice happens to have those street cams that are out there. And so you can go on a website that's hosted by, I forget whom, there's a hotel and there's a bunch of different places that have their own webcams, and they show you the street like live. There's a live feed of the street at that particular point. You can even take over the control if nobody else is using it and like point in different directions. So you can even like reorient the camera and say, oh, I wonder how busy it is by the skate park, or I wonder what the boardwalk looks like right now. So I before I go out, I routinely check that to make sure it's as busy as I think it is. And then if it is, then I'm like 20 minutes away. I just hop in the car and I go. So yeah, so that's busy is good for street photography for sure.
Do you pay attention to light at all when you go out? I know a lot of people, they look for the light and only the light. They only go out in certain kinds of weather or early day, late day.
Yeah, well, black and white photography is I mean, great light is always good, obviously, but you can do a lot in post to offset the not so great light with black and white. So I'm really a moment driven photographer before I am a design or light driven photographer. Some people are all about light and then the moment comes second. It really depends. I'm not saying there's a good way to do it. It's just that what works for me. And so I pay less attention when I see something great happening. Of course, I'll try to position myself in a way that I think I lost my AirPods here.
You can still hear you. Are you hearing?
Okay.
Yep,
Okay,
I
no,
can still hear you.
I can hear you again. So yeah, so if I'm working a scene, I'll be conscious about where the light comes from and where I can get a better picture. But if it's happening in bad light, as long as I think like it's workable in post, I will still shoot it because it's for me it's really primarily about the moment. One thing I wanted to mention about the book, you mentioned my website for the books and everything. You can buy the books on Amazon and so on, and they might actually be cheaper. If I know some people really like having signed books, so if you order from my website, I will sign them before shipping them out, and some come with prints and stuff. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Something for everybody.
Before. Yes, exactly.
Well, I will say, in you talking about not really worrying about the light, sometimes it seems like you're more magician than photographer, because I've seen images of yours that are in that midday, bright, contrasty, hard light, and you still pull together a great image. And as somebody who goes out and shoots in the streets, I know the time of day he was out, and I know how hard it is to find great shots. So it puts a premium on everything else, because when I look at your images, it's so meticulous with your composition. I mean, I can almost picture you crouching down, laying down, bending, doing whatever you have to do to line all the elements up, because everything just seems to fit in like puzzle pieces. So it made sense when you talked about how, you will wait out an image. So it was great for you, when you were talking about that, to hear you talk about how you can wait out a certain image. I mean, is that something that has just become second nature to you and setting yourself apart? Because not everybody has that same approach. A lot of people will, they'll go out for a little bit. They like to stay on the move. Do you generally stay in one spot, or?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all. I do have, for me, it's a lot of those scenes that I work, they're a little bit like solving a puzzle. There's a little bit of a video game component to the whole, thing in terms of how it works in my brain. And so for me, it's really exciting when I work a scene to try to get all the pieces in the right place. And so that's what I strive for when I shoot. I'm like trying to, all these moving elements, I'm gonna try to figure out, can I put this in there? This guy's walking here, and maybe I can figure out where, he's gonna walk, and at some point he's gonna be exactly in the spot I want him, but this other guy is moving away. Like, so there's a lot of moving pieces, but like trying to solve that puzzle is really what satisfies me. So it doesn't always work, because things move fast and everything, but that's what I always strive for. So a lot of times what happens is I'll try different things and it will move very fast. I don't know if I got it, and I keep shooting and I keep trying, aiming for that vision that I have. And then in post, once I'm in Lightroom, I'll be like, almost got it, not quite. No, this guy's in the way. These two guys intersect, not good. And then one picture will be like, oh my God, everything fell into place exactly like I wanted. But I won't know that till I get to my computer, frankly. I mean, some photographers say, oh yeah, I knew when I shot it. I can't say that. It's just stuff moves too fast, and those scenes are so complex. Frankly, I don't know that I got it till I get to the computer, which is also why I keep shooting them till they're gone. Because I've had so many experiences where I thought I got it and I stopped shooting and I went away when the scene was still unfolding, in my early days. And I'd be like, in Lightroom, I'd be like, almost. Oh shit, I didn't get it. And and you can't go back, so that's, learn the hard way. You just stay with the scene. As long as it's there, you just stay with the scene, try different stuff, and hope for the best.
It's like you were mentioning with digital now, without overshooting, it's one of the benefits of not having to pay for film and processing is the ability to sit there and shoot a certain scene and make sure that you got your shot.
Right. Yeah, I would say there's nothing wrong once you're shooting a scene and you're thinking about how you're approaching it, and there's nothing wrong with shooting a lot in that scene. The mistake that I see people do with that shutteritis thing is that they're not discriminate in terms of what scene they're shooting. They're just like, oh, that could be nice. Oh, maybe this. And then at the end of the day, they have 2,000 pictures of like 25, 30 different scenes, when really they should have focused on just 3. That's the problem.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I was very glad to see you talk about that. Some of your earlier points resonated so much with me, because a lot of the street photography that I see now, it's almost like people just go out and it looks like everybody just shoots from the chest. Like people are afraid to be seen with a camera, and you can tell it's like they're not composed right. They're a little off. Everything's askew. The content's not really interesting. It's just a street scene. And I'm looking at some of these images that you were throwing up as like your what not to do images, or an uninteresting or dull shot. And I'm like, that's stuff that I see people throwing out as portfolio work. That it's not like they were horrible pictures, but I love how you really put a premium on really getting the best shot and not celebrating mediocrity in your images. And I think that really came through, and it was refreshing to see another street photographer talk about really setting a high goal for yourself in that regard.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I shoot mediocre shots all the time, way more than I shoot great shots. I just don't show them. you know that. And that's, you know, I think that's what makes you look like a genius, because if you use it right. Again, it's a superpower, but you got to use it right. And it's normal. I mean, I was once I won this contest with Nat Geo, and I was I sent to this assignment in South Korea, and it was with a Nat Geo editor, and once, you know, we sat down to discuss the work and everything, and she was like, you know, I go out with like Steve McCurry and these other guys, and, you know, 99% of the stuff they shoot, you know, I look at their SD, you know, I get their SD cards at the end of the day. Like, they don't edit before sending it to me. Like, I get the full SD card. Most of it is crap. Like, it's bad. It's like and that's normal. I think it's just any photographer. You just don't show it. And then the difference is also, I think great photographers can consistently produce great work. You know, it's not like they have one great image and then nothing for 2 years. They consistently produce great work. It's just, as a percentage of what they shoot, it's always a small percentage, you know, and that's normal.
Definitely. And I think a lot of stuff, it's like you were saying earlier, where sometimes you don't know what you have until you get back and you look at it. Everything looks great on the LCD screen.
Right.
You get it up on the computer and then it's like, oh, okay, maybe it's not so great. And sometimes you conceptualize something in your head and it just doesn't translate in the image that you take. So yeah.
Right. I think there's also, oh no, go ahead. Sorry.
No. Continue.
Yeah, I think there's also a set of criteria that you learn with experience as to what a good image should look like. You know, I think when you first start, you don't really have that criteria, and so instinctively things may or may not look good to you, and a lot of it is associated with your own emotional attachment to the shoot versus what's actually good or bad in the image. And so one of the things I spent a lot of time teaching in my workshops and also in my online master classes, what's the recipe for a good image? Like, what is an image that, you know, and how do you know if it's a good image? Is there anything wrong with it? How do you find what the you know, the defects are? Like, you know, if an image is, you know, almost good but not quite, like if there's something that kills it, you know, how to identify what that is. You know, it's impossible to know all that stuff when you start out. So that's something I spend a lot of time with students on.
Well, I want to stay right there because we have a question from Elizabeth, who's actually asking about the decision between what is an interesting scene and what's not. So how do you decide? Is that based on the photographer's point of view, or how do you decide what is an interesting scene and what's not?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a lot of things. There's a few things that go into it. One is I look for characters and scenes where the subject or the subjects have the potential for a moment. So either it could be like, you know, someone who looks very animated, or people that are, you know, talking in a very animated way, or a dog that looks like it's kind of out of hand, or it could be any of these things. But something that I think Cartier-Bresson used to talk about, like a pregnant moment. You know, something that it looks like a moment's going to happen. And this is something you kind of learn with experience, just observing people. You just kind of look everywhere and you kind of figure out where it's most likely to happen. It could also be a moment that has happened and you're like, shoot, I missed it. But oftentimes these repeat, you know, like a couple kisses and you're like, oh, I missed that kiss. What I do is I just get closer. Maybe I engage with them, maybe not. But I pre-compose and I wait for the next kiss. You know, so that's one thing. The other thing is you have to know whether it's going to work or not. You have to also look at whether the design will work. You know, is there a background behind it that's just completely distracting, and regardless of how great a moment it is, no one's going to really see it when they look at the picture. That's a big thing, is can you design this into something that will be simple enough and digestible enough by the viewer? So that's another thing. So sometimes I'll be like, oh my, you know, there's this great kind of pregnant moment, like, you know, this is like something's waiting to happen here, but it's in terrible light. You know, there's huge contrast. Just the background is very distracting. it's not going to work. So it might be a situation where if it's a bunch of people and they'll move, maybe I'll follow them to see if I can get them in a better light, in a better with a better background. But if it's a stationary thing, I just move on. I just write it off. Yeah, so it takes a little practice and experience to kind of identify what those promising moments and scenes are, but eventually, you do get a good sense of that, and then you stick with them, for as long as you can.
Now, in regards to, we all see interesting characters, and I think early on in like early on in my career, it was one of those things where an interesting character was enough. I didn't really focus on the scene as much as, okay, just the character, they're going to speak for themselves. I hit a certain point where the character wasn't just enough, and it was like, okay, so they're an interesting person. I live in New York. There's a million interesting people. What is your take on approach wise? Are you approaching that person with the idea of shaping the scene around them, or kind of getting close to them, as we've heard you continuously allude to, that you get yourself embedded in with them, or are you approaching them, or how do you approach something? You see somebody interesting on the street, how do you approach that scenario?
So typically, if it starts with seeing somebody interesting on the street, but not necessarily in the right place or at the right moment and that kind of thing, I teach. And so in my workshops, I teach 4 different methods of pursuing a scene, 4 different examples of what a scene can be. One of them is what you're describing. It's like identifying a character. And in that case, I fall into my follow method. So it's like one of 4 methods that I teach. And I basically follow the person around, either, if I can see that it's maybe better that I stay invisible, I just follow for not too long, staying invisible. And that means I have a pretty good sense that I can get the shot pretty quickly and without getting noticed. But most of the time, those follow situations, they get a little too creepy if you stay too long and you're, and then you don't get the right angle, that sort of thing. So I usually engage with the person, and that's back to what we were talking about earlier. Give them a compliment, a heartfelt compliment about why I was interested in them in the first place, what I'm doing, so it's not shady. I'm actually working on a project, this and that. The fact that I'm, asking them if it's okay to follow them for a little while, and tell them I'm going to share the pictures with them. So that's usually my approach for characters. It's just the follow, I call it. There's 4 Fs. So I'm not gonna talk about the other. We'll be here forever if I talk about the other 3. But it's a great way. What I see for students who come to my workshops, especially if you're stumped. A lot of times especially after like a couple of hours of shooting, you're kind of like, I don't know what to do next. Like, what am I supposed to know? There's people passing by, like they're frozen. And what I tell students is, think about those 4 Fs, think about those 4 methods, and pick one. Just, you see a character, follow them, and there's 3 other things that you can do. Just pick one and go for that. And usually it unblocks people, it unfreezes them, and they, okay, I know what I need to do now. So
wonderful. Well, our last question comes from Kit here, joining us on Zoom. Easy one, processing question. How much do you crop your photos?
So I'm not one of those people who say never crop. I know some photographers are very, very rigid about that. I don't like cropping too much. I think if you're going to crop, say, more than half the picture, you probably didn't do it right in the first place, and it probably doesn't deserve to be saved. But like you said, I have, I really try to nail the design. And sometimes, especially since I don't always have my camera to the eye, and it's not very, I'm not like doing a super critical cropping in camera, because I'm like aiming the camera from the ground and that kind of thing. So when I'm in post, I'll be like, you know what? It would actually be more dynamic if I cropped it slightly to the left, right? So I will do that occasionally for some photos. Not all of them. Some of them I'm lucky enough to have them, just straight out of the camera, perfect and no cropping needed. But I would say probably about maybe a third to half of my shots, I'll crop at least a tiny bit, because I really want that perfect geometry and everything. And I'm kind of a stickler for that. And I have those like, I'm a big believer in those. There's all those lines that you can superimpose your pictures to see if there's all those theories about composition. So I like to test my pictures with that and see, if I cropped it slightly here, then I'd get a much more compelling picture that would follow the lines better and that sort of thing. So I use cropping for that, and I'm not ashamed of it. Yeah, no, it's fine. I think it's fine to crop to achieve the design that you want. You just don't, I've seen like, cases where I think it was for World Press one year that a photo that won was, turned out to have been cropped, like from a tiny crop in the middle of the picture, that was like less than 10% of the overall picture. That's just,
Wow.
I won't vouch for that, but I think cropping a little bit is good. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, it's polishing. It's
Yeah.
trimming the edges a little bit just to make sure. Sometimes it, like you said, it just requires, you could have a little bit dead space on the right side that just takes your eye away from the scene, and removing it.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
absolutely.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and also the bright elements in the picture is where the eye goes first. So sometimes you have something really bright right on the edge. That's an easy one. You just take that out. So yeah, it's a tool, and I think it should be used, not abused, but I think it should be a tool in your toolbox.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that. Well, Dotan, as always, man, you dropped a lot of gems on us here. You threw some new stuff in there that, I hadn't heard before, some new pictures in there. So it's
Nice.
great to have a nice updated perspective. If you guys haven't checked out Dotan's work, the rest of his body of work, his books, his workshops, we got the information right up there on the screen, dotansaguy.com, where you can get all the information there. I encourage you to check it out. He's one of the best out there in the streets doing it. Really just meticulous work, super intelligent. Your perspective is always welcomed, and I learn something every time you're on. So I want to thank you again, Dotan. I want to thank our sponsor for today's event, Leica, as well.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Hey, it's always a pleasure to have you on, man. I'm looking forward to the next time already. To all of our viewers out there, I see you. Paris, Switzerland, join the party. Michigan, North Carolina, we got everybody. We got the states in here, and almost every continent. So huge thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in. Again, a huge thank you for Dotan for his wise expertise, and for Leica for sponsoring today's event. This wraps it up for today. Another